A big shift in the tropics today as Tropical Storm Erin has formed and is likely to strengthen into a hurricane over the next several days. This storm could take a close approach to the United States, and it may also impact Bermuda and parts of the Greater Antilles. And on top of that, we've seen significant flooding over the last 48 hours with severe weather continuing across the Central Plains. Much of the United States will heat up, but you need to know in the forecast for the next 7 days. As we look at our past radar, we are watching storms that over the weekend continue to fire from Kansas through Iowa into Wisconsin. In fact, when we look at some of the reports, this came in from a viewer on Facebook. This is the flooding that was common across places like Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, and pictures from the Wisconsin State Fairgrounds show significant flooding. All we have to do is take a look here at the observed precipitation over the last 72 hours, and we see heavy rain from parts of Kansas through Iowa up towards Wisconsin, including the greater Milwaukee area. And we see significant rains across the southeast through parts of Florida, including Tampa and the southeast. Zooming in on Florida, we see that over the last 48 to 72 hours, Sarasota, you've received 3 inches of rain. West Palm, you're checking in at 2.5. Orlando, you're just under 3/4. And Cape Coral, you're just at 1.25 inches of rain. Tampa, you've had 1.25 inches. The heaviest rain has stayed offshore. As we jump up towards Wisconsin, here has been the bullseye. Milwaukee, 7 inches. West Bend, almost 8 inches. We've received isolated reports of 14 inches of rain across this part. Madison, you're at 3 inches. Even in western parts of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, you're at 2.25, and just south of you, about 4 inches of rain. As we look across parts of Kansas, where we see those reds, we're seeing widespread 2 to 4 inches, and those continue up through southeastern Nebraska into Iowa, where 1 to 3 inches of rain was common over the last 72 hours. But our focus right now is on the tropics, and they are heating up quickly. In the central Atlantic, we have Tropical Storm Erin that is organizing. The National Hurricane Center gives this now a 90% chance of developing into a hurricane over the next few days. But it's not the only system we're watching. An area to the northeast and even one back here across the Gulf brought heavy rain to Tampa. We're watching an area of disorganized precipitation gather in that area. And that's why the National Hurricane Center, again, has advisories every 3 hours on Tropical Storm Erin as it's continuing its westward path. That area of low pressure in the central Atlantic remains about a 10% chance of development, as well as that area just to the south of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. We're watching that area as well for a 10% chance of development. And then in the Gulf, we're watching that area that brought the heavy rains to Tampa over the weekend. It too has about a 10% chance of development over the next 48 hours. But the thing is, Tropical Storm Erin. At the time of the recording of this video, we saw Tropical Storm Erin with winds about 45 miles per hour. It was centered about 30 degrees west and about 18 degrees north. Its general pattern was to the west at about 21 miles per hour. And as you can see from this cone of uncertainty, it's expected to remain a tropical storm for the next 48 hours. And it's then as it gets closer into some more favorable conditions that it will strengthen into a hurricane. And by the time we get to Saturday, it could strengthen into a major hurricane. This is a map of all the spaghetti model plots. So again, it remains very consistent in its track. Here's the Lesser Antilles Islands. There's Puerto Rico. Way up here is Bermuda. So it remains very consistent. And then as we get to about 120 hours out from now, so by the time we get to about Saturday, we start to see divergence in some of the modeling data. And we see that here on the intensity track. Again, here's where we are right now. It's a tropical storm. It remains tropical storm through about 48 hours. Here's that 40 hours. Some do strengthen it to a hurricane by then, but as we get out to 120 hours, most models have this now at a Category 2 or Category 3. 1 or 2 models even want to advance it to a Category 4. The reason that we expect that delay in development and intensification is going to happen is because where this system is. It's located about right here. So right now, sea surface temperatures in this general area are around 25, 26, 27 degrees Celsius. This is very marginal for tropical storm development, but the thing that's helping it is it's in an environment with rich in moisture and very low wind shear. So it's able to overcome those slightly cooler waters, and it is racing pretty quickly to the west. So it's going to quickly get into these 26s and 27s, and as we get to the Lesser Antilles, we think the rapid intensification is going to happen. Hurricane status maybe by Thursday or Friday, and then major hurricane as we get water temperatures here in the mid-80s by the time we get to Saturday. And as it approaches the United States, those temperatures are even warmer, 30 to 31 degrees centigrade for your sea surface temperatures. As I mentioned, this system is struggling because right out in front of it across the central Atlantic is an area of dry air indicated by those browns. But here comes Erin through the week. This is Thursday morning. It's continuing to maintain its relatively moist environment, but watch, this dry air is starting to wrap around. That's going to hinder its development over the next 48 hours. It's also why we can't tell it this far out because we don't have aircraft that is going out to survey this storm. But it's one of the reasons that we may be seeing some of that delay in its intensification because some dry air may already be wrapping into the system. We just don't have a lot of data on it right now. We do see scopes and satellite scans of this area. That gives us an estimation of the strength of the storm. But as we get towards the Greater Antilles, that's where we see that air really becoming saturated with the storm and allowing for that development. And here's the GFS model with its various members. But this black line here, that's the model consensus. So we see 24, 72, 120 hours. Not much variation. So as we approach the Antilles here, that's when the deviations start to occur. Some models on the GFS want to bring it into the Gulf by the time we get 240, 256 hours out from now. So that's 10 days from today, the middle of next week. Some models want to spin this out to sea, and that's what the majority of them do want to do, and that's why the consensus skew it out towards sea. We have some of them racing up towards the Canadian provinces. Right now, we're not seeing much in the way of impact along the East Coast as far as a direct landfall. There will be impacts no matter what through areas like Bermuda, and we will have some waves and rip currents across the eastern coast if it does get this close to the United States. But again, a lot of this can change. We're just now getting very preliminary data on this system, but as it continues to move west, we will have a better idea in the next 3 to 4 days of how this system is going to develop, where it's going to go, and what's the possible intensities for this storm. And here's another model. This is the European, and what I like about this model is it kind of pinpoints all the different places that the center of low pressure could be at the various times. And you see here by the weekend, they were very clustered, and as we get towards the weekend, they really start spreading out and curving off to the north and eventually the northeast. And we see low pressure systems here of about 990 millibars, and as they move towards north of Puerto Rico Saturday into Sunday, we see some of those pressures dropping 970. As they approach the United States, we even see some 950s and 940s, and as we get towards the end, there's even a 932. So the models really struggle after 120 hours of where this is going to go in both the American model and the European model. And that's why when we look at going back to the American model, the most likely scenario at the time of this recording on Monday night, the 11th, we think that it will curve back out to sea and not impact the United States. It'll probably impact Bermuda, but it will miss a landfall in the United States. Then there's this 20% chance here of these models of it coming close to the tracking a little bit further to the west, a little bit greater risk for places like Haiti, the Dominican Republic. That's one possibility. Or it even stays east of Bermuda and takes a set turn a lot quicker and races out into the central Atlantic. That's another possibility. So we're going to continue to watch this over the next several days. The other big story is the threat of severe weather. With that system that brought the heavy rain to parts of Florida, is that unorganized area of storms and showers makes its way west through the Gulf, eventually impacting parts of Louisiana. The main strong storms are staying well to the north of the Canadian border this week, rumbling through the provinces. We continue to see a weak trough across the Central Plains. That's going to be short-lived, but it is what it's allowing those storms to fire across parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, and Iowa in the afternoon. In fact, we really don't see much in the way of severe weather as we go into our Tuesday, with the Storm Prediction Center keeping most of that severe weather across parts of Michigan as well as parts of Arizona and New Mexico, where we are seeing a little bit of a monsoon flow. The main threat is going to be heavy rain and the occasional thunderstorm across most of the southeast and eastern half of the United States. And that's going to be the trend as we go throughout this week. By the time we get to Wednesday, we do see an increased chance of severe weather across the Dakotas. Where that exactly pans out is still too early to be determined. By the time we get to Thursday, the Storm Prediction Center has gone ahead and issued a 15% chance of severe weather across this part of the country. And that's pretty rare for them to go ahead and do this far early. It's just a signal of the power of a low pressure system that we expect to develop over the Canadian provinces and sweep towards Hudson Bay into the northeast by the time we get to this upcoming weekend. And it is that low pressure and that associated trough as it moves across the Canadian province in the northeast that is going to have a direct impact on where Tropical Storm Erin eventually goes. If it gets here about the same time, it's going to help push it out to sea. So we're going to have to watch those two factors and the timing of those. But I will say that in today's models, they have sped up the acceleration of Tropical Storm Erin towards the United States, and the low pressure has slowed down ever so slightly in the last couple of model runs. And what's happening is, as I mentioned, we have a weak trough here across the Central Plains. That's going to move to the east, and that's going to provide severe storms for Michigan on our Tuesday. But out west, we already have a ridge starting to build. It's going to spread to the central United States. And here comes that next trough, that deepening trough across parts of Alberta and Saskatchewan, bringing severe weather on our Thursday to the Dakotas and Northern Plains, while heat reigns across the eastern half of the United States. And yet another trough starts to dig across the Pacific Northwest as we watch that low pressure eventually meet up with what will become potentially Hurricane Erin later this week in the Atlantic. So a lot of factors are going to be at play. So we're going to watch each of these and how they develop over the next several days to determine how they impact your local forecast. But the thing that's not really going to change is the heat. Our high temperatures on our Tuesday are going to be in the 90s for most of the Central Plains through the Ohio Valley into the Northeast. Parts of Maine, you're even in the 90s, but the heat is really out west. 100s from Washington State down through the interior of California, where you could be in the 1-teens. Las Vegas, you're at 110. The desert, you're 115 to 120. And that's really not going to change. We will see that little trough starting to move through the Great Lakes, slightly bringing our temperatures down a little bit below normal by the time we get to our Wednesday and to our Thursday. But as that trough moves through, we start to warm up across the Central Plains. Highs are in the triple digits across the Dakotas down through Texas. Cooling off in the Pacific Northwest as that next trough starts to dig in. Temperatures there only in the 80s and 90s, and that cool down continues with temperatures in the 70s and 80s. The interior California and the desert you remain warm, as well as the Central Plains. Even the East Coast is cooling down into the 80s. The 90s are really being confined to the Southwest as we approach this upcoming weekend. Saturday, we could see 110 for parts of Nebraska and Kansas. 90s widespread across the Southeast, up through the Mid-Atlantic into the Northeast, and that heat wave is going to build again as we get into early next week. High temperatures mid-90s for the Ohio Valley, near 100 for the Tennessee Valley and most of the Southeast, as well as Texas through Nebraska. The real cool spots are going to be in the Pacific Northwest, where temperatures are going to be in the 70s and 80s. The other big story is the amount of precipitation over the next week. Where we saw that low pressure through the Gulf, it's going to bring heavy amounts of rain across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. As those storms roll through the upper plains, especially this upcoming weekend, heavy rains across parts of Wisconsin. So that's going to only exacerbate the flooding that's already occurring there. And with those troughs digging in across the Pacific Northwest, heavy amounts of rain for Washington State into Oregon. We're in that time of year now where we have to watch for atmospheric rivers in that part of the country. But down across the Southeast, we're going to see 1 to 2, possibly 3 inches of rain over the next 7 days across parts of Alabama, Georgia, into the Carolinas. Looking across parts of the Midwest, Wisconsin, you seem to be in the bullseye again. 2 to 4 inches of rain are likely over the next week. Couple that with the 9 to 12 inches you've already received, and that is a lot of rain and with no place to go across most of the state of Wisconsin. Northern Illinois into southern Michigan, 1 to 2 inches of rain are likely. Most areas are remaining under a half an inch. We could see heavier totals over the lower Ohio Valley, where parts of Kentucky also could see 1 to 2 inches of rain. And taking a look in the Pacific Northwest, as I mentioned, we're now getting to that point of the year where atmospheric rivers do become a concern. We're already seeing that across parts of British Columbia, where 4 to 6 inches of rain are likely. But as we make our way down along the coast of Washington and Oregon, 1 to 2 inches. And as we get to the Sierras, 1 to 2, possibly 3 inches of rainfall is likely. And this pattern is going to continue, but the noticeable changes after we get through this weekend, heat in the eastern half of the United States. With that deep trough that is going to be coming across the Canadian provinces, it's going to bring cooler than normal temperatures across the eastern third of the United States as we get into the third week towards the latter parts of August. The real above normal temperatures are going to shift out across the west and across the southern tier. What's not going to change is the amount of precipitation. We do see above normal precipitation across the southeast, up the eastern coast. A lot of this is dependent upon the track that Tropical Storm Erin takes. We're going to be dry across the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes, the Intermountain West through the southwest, above normal precipitation. But after we get through this weekend's rainfall in the Pacific Northwest, you're turning dry again as that track does move a little bit further north with that ridge of hot air building across the western half of the United States. So to recap, Tropical Storm Erin is likely to become a hurricane in the next few days. And while the most likely scenario does keep it offshore, we cannot rule out a U.S. impact just yet. Keep an eye on the forecast. Meanwhile, severe weather threat is lower this week, but flooding cleanup continues in the plains and the Midwest, and much of the nation is heating up. Make sure you're subscribed here, have those notifications turned on, and I'll have more updates on Erin's track as it becomes clear. Have a great day.